All right, welcome, Dungeon Mastery. Hey, Robin.
Hey, how you doing, Jez?
Good. Back with episode 2 of Dungeon Mastery. I was pretty pumped after last thing of this we did about a month ago. Yourself?
I had a DM's high.
A DM's high. What is a DM's high? Because I feel like that's relevant to everything we're talking about right now.
Probably is. I think we chatted a bit offline, but it was just this feeling like a lot of what we do is hidden in the shadows and is only sees the light of day when we actually get to show it to our players. And then even then, sometimes a lot of the things we think about and plan never see the light of day, whether players summon a mega mecha clippy or something to solve a situation. There's a lot of ways that change that path. And so being able to share some of that DM behind the screen magic with you was really fun, and I think being able to chat about it has been really enjoyable for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, same kind of thing, right? Like it's like all these things that in preparing and building the campaign I'm running at the moment, a lot of them you got to keep secret for like months or potentially years. But being able to like brainstorm with someone in the open potentially and just throw those ideas around, you kind of like, this is validating. This is, I feel like I'm on the right track a little bit.
Yeah, like I'm not doing it too badly.
yeah, absolutely. So today we are talking about a specific topic, whereas last week it was just all things beginning DMing. Last episode. This time we're talking about preparing to start a new campaign. The taking on that massive burden and throwing your hand in the air and saying, yes, I'll take on that responsibility of running this adventure, running this campaign for a group of friends. And I'm this is something I'm really keen to explore because having just recently started Rama the Frost Maiden, I feel like there was tons to go into it. But I'm keen to hear from you first, Robin, since you're the wizard DM here and I'm just a noob. Let's start with homebrew versus. I think you said last time you're predominantly a homebrew guy, right?
This one is so nuanced, because I think the campaigns that we've played together, I think with every best intention, were designed to have me run them by the book to reduce the amount of prep needed to make running easier, right? I think that was always the idea I had with those book adventures. And I guess like what it initially made me think as I began reading it was that there was a lot of cool content. You open one of those books up and you're flicking through it, and it's just there's a whole world to jump into. Now, I found the most difficult part about that though is that it doesn't really allow for some of the shenanigans that I think for me make D&D so special and such a cool game. And I also think it made it that you had to first study a whole bunch and like become almost a scholar of somebody else's imagination. And for me, in the end of the day, I think I don't have the most studious of personalities, and so I found myself sometimes running to the end of my study prep that I was supposed to have sort of finished, and then the rest of it was like, well, my imagination's been good enough the whole way through as it is anyway. I might as well just imagine the rest of it from here and sort of make it something of our own. And so I think, use what is inspiring, but at the end of the day, what happens at your table and the uniqueness that you bring to it is the best part, in my opinion, of the DM's, part of this game. What about yourself?
Yeah, look, I think much the same. Like, so far, I think the only homebrew thing or completely improvised type thing I've run was the very first time I acted as DM, and it was like one of our Christmas episodes. I thought I'll try my hand at this kind of thing. It was obviously very straightforward. Couple of dudes, there's a bad guy, go fight. But what I even enjoyed in that moment was like I had to think about reasons for why certain types of creatures would exist in that environment. And since then, I've only ever run pre-written content, whether that's Candlekeep Mysteries or now Rama the Frost Maiden. You're right. Like, just running a full Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign, there's like 250 pages of like A4 page reading to try and get through, and that's a lot. And even though I'm still not quite finished reading it, I've got about 10 pages to go on it.
Well, good job at getting that far.
Oh my god, it's a slog. I'm really keen to finish it ahead of time, so I have a good understanding of what the end goal is, so I can like lay breadcrumbs down for that end game. Whereas I think with homebrew, it's kind of like, what's next? You've got some idea of it, but you haven't got to like. You can make up the breadcrumbs and adapt the end game as you go.
Yes.
Whereas now I've got to like really be really conscious of what breadcrumbs and what clues and what events I need to place to lead up to that end goal. And sure, I can pivot and I can adjust and change the end goal. Great, but I think that in doing that, there's risk to impact other areas of that content that I may not have thought about or have
it's like
remembered.
You don't know it like the back of your hand, like you would if it was
Exactly.
your world, your setting, like your place, you know?
Yeah. Having said that, in this kind of very sandboxy, pre-written space we're in, I have found the freedom to create homebrew-esque type things. And I'm finding that those areas I don't really need to prepare too much for, because I've already got some idea of like the character backstory tie-ins and why this is important, even though it doesn't tie into the main story yet. It might, but not yet.
We'll find out. Well, that's really cool. I guess it's fun to see. I think like somewhere I said, between you and I think we have the right mix. I think your ability to sit there and study it and make sure you get that full picture, I think makes your worlds feel very rich, and you're able to bring a lot of that depth into it, which is something that you called me a wizard before, but I'm still working really hard as a writer and as a storyteller to build depth into it, but make it engaging and not draining. I don't want to be giving lore dumps, but I also want there to be a reason for the players to feel invested in the world that they find themselves in. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, there's got to be a healthy respect from the players for the world you've created, especially if it's homebrew, because that's heart and soul you're pouring into that kind of thing, right?
That's my baby.
Yeah, exactly. I was listening to something the other day. I think I've been starting to watch your that Matt Colville series. Loving it.
Oh yes,
super engaging. He talks 1,000 miles an hour, but it all makes perfect sense. And he's like, some people just may not gravitate or adapt to your world the way you see it. They might go into something completely left of center, and that's going to impact how your world works. But that's going to be true of any pre-written content as well, I guess.
Right? My favorite example of this, though, is I think when you guys killed Xanathar, that to me was this thing that up until that point the ramifications didn't matter. It was like, no, the world just keeps rolling. You keep flicking to the next page, and the story will just sort of unfold for me. At that moment, the rest of the pages in the book almost stopped mattering.
Yeah.
And that was a cool moment for me as a DM when I was like, you guys have just wasted 50% of this manual. Like that was where I think it provided a really great launch pad for a cool campaign.
Yeah. It was really funny seeing the just the consideration on your face of like, yeah, okay, now we have to go into my brain, so good luck.
Yeah,
right?
now we're in uncharted territory.
Exactly right. I come back to you've got your homebrew world, one we ran in Trancastra and called the Seven Rings, and inside that you ran a pre-written adventure, right, with the Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Yes. That's a really interesting way to approach it as well. And tell me, when you were thinking about, hey, it would be cool to run this very Fey adventure, but you've got your very real adventuring campaign already kind of built, how much study, pre-work did you have to do to try and make that work into your world? And us as players, and how we were going to impact that?
The biggest one was, I think, the way that your characters would tie into it. it's very important for me that there was a believable reason to want to go there, to need to go there. Obviously, as a DM, the biggest one was the rings themselves. Those are sort of core elements to my campaign, and I think my biggest success has always been as a DM giving these sort of meta narrative awards to players, sort of this thing that you can strive for throughout the entire campaign from level 1 to level 20. In my first world, when I was initially doing, I think it was like Call of the Ancients, which was when they were all started level 1 and they were sort of transitioning all the way to hopefully taking on mantles of deities themselves. They sort of had this, every time they leveled up, they started to connect more with their patron deity, and it sort of was a very clear evolution of their power. It was also their like closeness to this like godlike being. And so it was like cool being able to increase the epicness naturally in the storytelling as we got closer and closer to the peak. Not that we've sort of finished with Trankasha yet, but that's sort of one of the things that I really love about it, is that as you uncover each of these things, it's an opportunity to not only increase in power, but also to delve just a little bit deeper in what's going on in the world, and what's actually happening behind the scenes. It's been a fun way to reveal just one more layer of the story.
I think, yeah, that multi-layer type storytelling is something which I felt in when I was reading through Rama the Frost Maiden. It was probably a little bit thin on, and so that's what I'm having to go and create for that, to get players more invested in the world and for them to have a reason to care. But yeah, preparing for when we decided, okay, we want to play Rama the Frost Maiden, or I wanted to run it. Who wants to play, basically? I did heaps of research on it, right? I was watching YouTube videos on it. I went to DMs.
Did you ever read the Dris Jordan books?
I'm trying to listen to it on audiobooks. I haven't got through one yet because the narrator is very slow.
I will say that when you mentioned that, the world that book sort of evokes is really beautiful, and one of the things that makes what is otherwise quite an uninviting and chilling environment, the characters in that place, the people and the relationships with each other, I think is really the magic there. It's like how they survive as these little units, these little families, and how that dynamic plays. Like, I always found that to be kind of fascinating. Is like, why would you stay in this terrible place? Like, what's keeping you here?
Exactly right. And that's been asked. Like, basically, why would people stay in these towns when they're just like basically a shithole? Why would you stay there? So yeah, I've had to kind of come up with that kind of thing on the fly, but luckily I came up with something kind of very similar to where else can you go kind of concept. But yeah, like having to do all this, feeling like I had to sorry, let me start that again. In preparing for this, I felt like I had to have the entire landscape and the entire plot lines and all the different kinds of main NPCs and things like in my brain. And everything I read about it it's really recommended go and flesh this area out better, and here's a bunch of content for that. I'm like, oh shit, now I've got the main campaign book. I've got 2 other like supplementary documents which are awesome, by the way.
Just giving you more homework to do.
Yeah, which is more homework. But yeah, there was a lot of reading. However, put my however in there, I feel like having, at least in this world, someone else thought of all the things for me has been a godsend. I'm still got the freedom to add more stuff in and change things as I see fit. But having like an extra half a dozen places of interest in each town, just someone else has come up with it, fantastic. But it does mean a lot of reading.
It's just like,
rereading.
Either you have to write a lot of things down, or you have to read a lot of things and remember a lot of things. It's like either you have to have great admin or great research. It's like you can't have it one. There's no other way to really run good campaign with memorable characters that you can go back to.
When you were running either Waterdeep or Wild Beyond the Witchlight Forest, did you how in depth did you read the content? Did you just like scan over and go, "Yep, that'll work. I get it. I'll adapt," or was it like in depth read and then prior to session reread and get everything in your head proper?
For me, I think like I love reading that stuff as source material, sort of as inspiration for the session. So it's definitely like trying to get the broad strokes of the start and the end, making sure that I understand the process at least on a session by session basis. And then it would be about creating those cool moments throughout. And for me, half the battle of prepping any new campaign is just immersing myself in the kind of world it is, the kind of descriptions I should give, like what makes this world feel different. And once I can like imagine it, for me it was the bazaars of Waterdeep, for example, these like city streets just like filled with paraders and these incredible magic acts, and the city that has been sort of steeped in magic for thousands of years. The very walls themselves are magically able to come to life to defend the city. It's like that. Now I see like the gods themselves know how to deal with rogue magicians. This is not a place you can be cheeky. This is a place that has magicians to beat magicians. and I was like, okay, cool. Like this is a level of D&D that I had to just level up. I wasn't in the small tavern in a small town anymore dealing with goblins. I was now dealing with a sophisticated empire. And I think that as a DM, you challenge yourself with every new thing you run. And I tried to be more, try to bring in more political factions and try to adopt what makes Waterdeep sort of interesting. But like you said, there's a lot of stuff, and at the end of the day, I could only prep so much and learn so much lore about all of these factions that people have been imagining for a decade. So I think like we took the pieces that we latched on to as a group, and I definitely was able to prep just a session ahead fairly effectively, where like luckily you hear something, somebody's interested in pursuing something, you can usually as a DM fill the rest of the session with other things and make sure that you have the time between sessions to prep that next thing that you may not be too sure of. So sometimes I'll park something and fill the time, and then I'll come back with preparation with maybe even a pre-written sort of introduction to the scene, just to help give it a bit more gravitas, because I realize there's something really cool and iconic after doing that research.
And in running either Waterdeep or whatever, was there ever a moment where something like that might have happened and you just gone ahead with things in a different direction to what content was written as because it wasn't there in your memory?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. Like I cannot understate this, all the time. The fact of the matter is, and this is probably a testament to the forgiving nature of DMing, we at the end of the day write ourselves into corners, but we have literally infinite magic to write ourselves out of corners. And that's also kind of cool when you realize that you've made a oopsie. Well, that's fine, because he has a teleportation device that makes it super easy for him to get around. Yes, that may introduce even more problems in the future, but for right now, that's a pretty cool answer. So that's what we're going with.
That's it. That's a future DM problem.
Yeah, it's not for me right now. Like, we may never get to that. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I was trying to think before when I was running, like getting my head around Icewind Dale, how to prepare the players for the kind of landscape, the kind of setting that this would take place in. Tell me, how have you gone about that kind of thing in the past, and then I'll share my experience doing the same, because you've run obviously the Feywild and Trancasha, and at least for us Waterdeep, all very different environments.
Yeah, and I think you always reflect on the way that works well and the way that didn't work well. I think I have a tendency to imagine on the spot and try and like things happen and worlds just appear sometimes for me, and that's great, but it doesn't help when we're trying to like track down all of the prep we do. Sorry, what was your question ago? About myself.
Like, how do you prepare your players and characters for the setting you've got ready?
Right. I think what I would like to do going forward is do sort of a pack, like a immersion pack, where it's like I'd love to give like a key, like iconic things about this world, things that they know about it, things that they would be able to relate to as their characters. It's hard sometimes jumping into a new world and both having to learn your own character and also the world you find yourself in, and both adjusting for both of those things. I've at least historically done it with a bit of a monologue. I find like a fun dramatic monologue that evokes the visual of the location, that evokes like the smell, the taste, the feeling in the air, is usually enough for most players to get a bit of excitement in that moment, like, oh cool, there's something to latch onto. So that's usually session to session how it works. So at a high level. How
would you prepare them before even session one though? Like to say to get them ready for this is a city-based thing, or this is a Feywild thing, or this is a open wilderness type thing. Be like, so they have an idea of how to craft characters for that environment.
I think some of the fun that I've seen done, and there's a few different approaches. The one that Matt Mercer does, which is interesting, is letting people run separate session zeros in smaller groups and build characters kind of collaboratively through play as they're sort of discovering the world. So they play a off-camera session already and build some understanding before throwing them in front of the cameras. The other one that I think was quite creative was the approach from the guys from my brother and me, Adventure Zone, and they did one of their campaigns where they actually used another separate game that's a world building game. And so they got all the players together and they played this world building game as a group. And so before they even started jumping into the world, they had all collaboratively built it together. And so that was really interesting to me, imagining a game where my players know the world as well as I do, and they've built their story with that richness of understanding. Even though they don't really know what's coming or what the story's going to be, they know the history of the world that they're about to jump into.
That is very cool. I can imagine something like that could take potentially a very long time, though. That wouldn't be something you could run in a session 0, for example, right? That would take weeks on its own.
I think they probably took like 3 sessions
of
time. So that's like the investment. And if you think about maybe 3 years of time spent in that campaign, three sessions weeks is probably a pretty good
yeah, that's not too bad. I was anticipating a lot longer than that.
It's just like, I guess you kind of just think about the iconic things in the world, you know, like here is this epic reef that is just steeped in lore, and as a group, like that's something you cling on to, you build that iconic piece together. But what is between that and the next iconic piece, I guess, is still a wide expanse of open space to build in, but you at least give the rest of it at a high level that history.
I see what you mean, because in a landscape, in a world, there's going to be major events or major monuments which pretty much everyone in that space is going to know about, right? Rather than starting session 1 where it's like, I am a blank slate, teach me what's going on.
In this particular world, for example, they didn't, there was no land, I think, left for some reason. So they all had to, as a group, decide on why there was no land and what had caused that, and how, like, what was the story of the people that ended up just abandoning their land, homes, and building a life on the water. And that was sort of part of their session 0, was deciding on these like core pieces of history that they would be leading on from.
Yeah, right. That is big. The only example I've got for this is for Rama the Frost Maiden, running it now, Raging Rolls, Thursday nights. Plug. I found an example from Sly Flourish, who's another creator.
Oh yes, I love Sly Forage. He's the lazy DM, right?
He's the lazy DM, yeah. Created the Lazy DM's workbook, which is a fantastic structure. Use it all the time.
Highly recommend too.
But I found this template specifically for even Icewind Dale, which was great.
Oh.
And it provided things like give people the starting town they're going to exist in, because there's obviously 10 different starting locations you can pick from. Here's what it is. Here's a bit of the background of that town, the current situation you find yourselves in. Wanted to share what's the attitudes of the people in the town and in the area, so they know what kind of demeanor they're facing. I think this is particularly important for Icewind Dale because that's such an isolated area. They're not going to have so much diversity of attitude in there. And then things more, I guess, tactical in terms of gameplay is listing out the rule variations that's going to be in play, right? So for example, mine was like, consuming a potion of your own is always a bonus action. Chucking a potion to somebody else or handing someone something is a bonus action. But trying to force feed a potion to somebody else is a full action, right? Just so all these things are clear up front. There's no arguments later. I've also just, for shits and giggles, and I think I got this idea from you maybe, is death saves are going to be rolled blind.
Ooh.
We've had this already, and Jesus adds another level of tension to the situation. You've got to try and...
It's almost the only reason you'd want to do that, and it works very well.
It's so good. So just a way of explanation, should death saves ever be required, only the person rolling or doing the save and the DM will see that roll, which is a very easy thing to do in Boundary. BT to your choice.
So you don't hide it from the player whose life is on the line. They still know the state of their character.
They see it.
I think that's smart. I think because one of the things that I've heard a lot is if you only roll as the DM, the player feels like a loss of agency.
Yeah.
So this way, it's a nice middle ground.
Yeah. Although we haven't had any kind of like on-screen signals and giveaways yet, but I have the power to switch people's cameras off if they start doing that kind of things.
Oh no.
And the other thing which I've read around and thought was pretty important was any kind of like trigger warnings which may be in the sessions going forward, just to say, if anyone feels uncomfortable, raise a flag and we'll stop and adjust. Because I think that, we all try and create very immersive worlds, and sometimes people can get quite involved in that and get quite immersed in it, which is what you really want. But you don't want people feeling like this is just gross or not my cup of tea.
And it's nice to know where the limits are so that you can, make sure that nobody feels like their boundaries are being crossed. Yeah,
because at the end of the day, you're there to make sure everyone, including yourself, is having fun. It's not just about causing pain to people.
And D&D somehow puts you in really complex situations by nature of the people playing.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've got to navigate as the NPCs like a neutral way, like a neutral conclusion to this. Like I consider one of the ones like Finnery ends up in a cage, but in a tower by a bandit who has a history with him that Finnery keeps insinuating is getting worse and worse. And then I'm like, okay, well, this is great. I'm loving that we've got this complexity, but I also do not want to roleplay this extensively. Like, where did we draw the line? Like, I think we can cut to black at this point.
Yeah, always fade to black. So good. And the last thing I added into this document was obligations, like a bit of a social contract, just to let people know that as DM, like, we put tons of effort and time into these kind of things. We're preparing it and executing it. And I want to make sure people are committed to showing up and participating in that. Not to the point where it becomes like a chore, but like I want them to have skin in the game in this.
Mutual respect.
Yeah, exactly. So look, if I'm happy to share my document. I'll just templatize it a little bit. I might put it in the notes or the Discord or something. I'll share it around. Just might give people some ideas of what I'm talking about. Have you ever done something like that? Provided like a pre-campaign like cheat sheet, for lack of a better term? Because I should also clarify, this cheat sheet or this intro guide also included things like, here's some extra background you can pick from. Here's some trinkets and things which tie you to the world better. Like, it wasn't all just like black and white contract based.
I don't think I have, honestly. I think that's an area where I'd love to flesh out a bit more and to put a bit more into is that pre-campaign establishment, making sure everybody's on the same page. I think equally as importantly, making giving good reasons for everybody in the party to love each other or like each other and work together, and reasons for them to stay together, and like a really compelling why they all want to be on this path, because that's like if you don't figure that one out fairly early, it all falls apart, regardless of how cool the story is.
100%. Which kind of ties into our next area around character backstory co-development. Your example, your just comment then around making sure you have a cohesive party. I'm interested to hear your experience in this, especially when, say, in session 1, you've got 6, 7, maybe 8 players, I think we had at one point, all starting with completely separate individual characters and trying to, as a DM, trying to kick that off. Do you have a strategy? Like, how do you bring these people together and say, you're a party, go?
I think you have to play the characters and you also have to play the players. I think there's a real two parts to that. The players, naturally, some people lend themselves more to trying to solve problems and trying to jump into leading the solution. So often it's equally about managing that level and like the meta narrative of like, what are we doing, what's happening in front of us. And so you sort of, I'm encouraging as the DM, like, okay, that's an interesting idea, but have you thought about this? Like, let's not necessarily go all the way over here just yet. And then in the narrative, I think it's definitely about encouraging, I guess, embedding every individual person's why into the same direction. With 8 people, that's hard to do. And so I guess part of the thing that I think is important is making sure that you have smaller relationships in a party that are very tight. 2 people might have a shared backstory, and another 2 people might have, encountered the same ethereal being when they were younger. These things that, like, at least I might not have direct skin in the game, but I'm not going to leave my friend to die without my help. So of course I'm coming with you. Those things help keep people together, even when they might not be the star of the show in a particular arc.
Would you say that it's always a good idea to help players develop their character backstories with that kind of connection to other players in mind?
I think ideally, and I haven't quite figured out the secret sauce yet. I'm still every like, you don't get the chance to launch campaigns very often.
Yeah.
So you try something new every time, but the data is very skewed. I think that would be something that I'd love to do, is figure out a way that, maybe even it is on a weekend with some drinks and some snacks, but we get people together and we spend the day just workshopping characters and thinking about the cool things we could do. Like, oh, what if it's like this instead? And then I was like, yeah, do that. That's so cool. Like, I think that there needs to be a little bit of that where everybody else is also super excited to see what the other person's bringing to the table. And I think I'd love to jump into a new campaign where, we might have a bit of that familiarity already and that understanding of how we all fit together and like where we all want to go. And, even the DM helping out, like, this is sort of, by the end of the first episode, this is the direction we are sort of going to be heading in, helping people make sure their characters are already sort of set up to take the bait. I think you have to be able to have that conversation with your players, especially as we do in the streaming world. There's less room for, no, I want to go in my own direction. It has to have a bit more cohesion.
Yeah, party splits in the world of streaming is less than ideal.
Indeed. Which of the layouts have we got on again?
Yeah, exactly. So I keep asking you all the questions because you're good at answering them and I'm learning. When you've been starting up new campaigns, and granted you don't get to do this every week, it's like once every couple of years essentially, and you'll help, like, people are building their new characters, how involved do you get as a DM in helping craft that backstory? Because the reason I ask is that I think that character backstories are super important and super critical to the story itself. And I'm constantly trying to find little hooks and tie-ins to this pre-written content for everyone's unique backstory. So I'm keen to hear from you, is like, how much forethought do you give to, or how much influence do you have, or coaching into character backstory development going into a new campaign?
Again, one of those things where I'd love to do more of it. I think it helps because you can take their idea and embed it in your world in a really nice way. If the player is open to it, there's a lot of value in yes-anding their character and sort of bringing other tie-ins in. The nature of life is that we get busy though, and so sometimes we don't have a chance to really give every single player, especially like we have 8 players, so getting everybody that kind of attention is hard. One of the people that I did have to spend a bit of time on was the gunslinger Flint, who ends up carrying quite a number of narrative threads, just as a nature of their job and the nature of the campaign. That archaeologist was a natural fit for the world, and so I really wanted to make sure that in doing so there was a lot of tie-in to the lore of it, because I think it was like a good natural way to expose that story. But otherwise, I think what I encourage in backstories, and I think we've shown it quite well, especially in the sort of the ad hoc way that I tend to DM, open plot threads are really helpful. I think when you're creating something early on, especially when you don't really know your character very well and don't really know the world very well, or the tone of it, a lot of the fun we've had, I think, in the stories we've told is taking something small. Like I saw somebody take my family and I saw a symbol of their tribe as they were running off, and that's enough. That's the breadcrumbs we need to tell a cool story collaboratively. What about this? No, I don't think that's quite right. And so in running the sessions, I think I collaborate more moment to moment. It's like, hey, this is kind of the direction I think I want to take this plot thread. Do you think this is a good and cool way for your character to go? And in doing that, we end up steering the ship together through the world and helping it feel more connected based on the things that have happened, and adjusting it based on the players' involvement going forward.
Interesting. So you're saying that you would like work with a player on how some kind of plot hook or events in the world can affect their backstory, and give them sort of fair warning of what you were thinking about how to take that.
In the best cases, as much as I can. I think your example of your character going through quite a dramatic personality shift was an interesting one of those cases where something was up, and we were working out sort of what was happening as the story was being unveiled, and the magic was sort of becoming more evident. And it was cool. Like one day we sort of like, this is kind of what I think is happening, and it was like, yeah, that's actually a really cool idea. I think that's awesome. Here's also something else to consider. Great, let's do it. And then in that moment, you had the agency to express that, knowing that I had sort of the confidence in the direction you were going. I knew the story you were trying to tell. And so we were able to play off each other without revealing the whole gambit. It was great.
Right. Okay.
I think that's some of that collaboration that I think is important on the moment to moment gameplay.
I'm finding at the moment that I'm tapping into. I feel like we're still early into the campaign. We're session 12, I think, next week. I'm tapping into a bunch of different character backstories as early as possible. But I haven't tried yet to work with them offline about what that might look like. So far it's been like, oh, I know something in your backstory. I know where I want to take that. Here's an event, kind of deal with it.
Nice.
and then use that to see what happens next. But I'll see how
that's their decision, is like how they react to the situation.
But equally, that I might be presenting an opportunity which that them as a player has no interest in pursuing. So I don't want to force that on someone if that's not of interest.
It's a hard one, that, hey, it's like sometimes we're like, that's kind of cool, let's put it in there, and then the players like brush over it fairly fast. You're like, oh, ooh, that was a lot.
Spent a lot of time preparing that one. Oh.
Like, oh, well, that wasn't the hit I thought it was. Moving on.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh, too funny. You mentioned something before. I want to double back on. I hate using the phrase double click. It sounds way too wanky. It's the first thing that came to head.
Let's double click on that one quickly.
You said your DM style is a bit more ad hoc. What does that mean?
Yes. I think I have early memories of like the imagination type play as a child, and coming up with just incredible things on the spot. And I think some of that magic is really stuck with me in time. The prep for me has always been about arming me with content that I can base off of and use as jumping off points for what actually ends up happening. And so sometimes it does feel like I come in, I prep by just downloading a bunch of cool visual stimulus, and then I figure out like the rough endpoint, and then like I just build the thing that feels the most cool and the most narratively fulfilling in that session, and sort of build off of the previous sessions, build off the momentum, build off of the character moments that happen, and continue to just sort of ad hoc think, oh, right now I'm in the fight, I need something cool here. Hang on, this would be an awesome opportunity to have Anubis make his presence known. Okay, well, if we're doing that, then we have to bring in something of equal weight to like warrant Anubis's presence. It's like, all right, now we've got a session. It's like those things just naturally come together. When you want to highlight a player, then you naturally have to highlight an enemy. It's like you have to give them a challenge to overcome, very much like you mentioned. And I think those opportunities just naturally showed themselves. Like we had the shift with Xanathar where we took a massive left turn, but it gave me immediately an opportunity when I was like, what's the next big bad if this is kind of redundant? Your backstories were an easy answer to that question, where I was like, oh, great. Here's a thread we haven't quite pulled at yet. Let's start to bring this out. And that's when we had the cool orc chieftain, and we started to bring in, another faction into Waterdeep. That was all just because, it was there and we needed it narratively. And so I looked for, the infinite magic. Sometimes the story is already written down. It's just not in your notes. It's in somebody else's.
Yeah, amazing. And do you kind of, again, more questions for you. When a player comes to you, is it typically you're receiving a fairly well fleshed out backstory, or are you getting like a couple of bullet points and roll with it, DM, see what you come up with?
Different players, different approaches.
What do you prefer?
That's actually a really hard one. I honestly sometimes think that people write beautiful things for their character, they like multi-page breakdowns of their history and their characters' nuances and things like that. As a personality, I would probably be on the dot point half for the most part. Like, I think broad strokes, I think big picture, this is kind of the cool vibe I'm going for. The rest will come out in the wash. But the people that come in with all of that lore, like sometimes it feels like they've done more prep on their character than I've done on the whole world. and it's like, it's not like that's necessarily a good thing, but it feels harder to mess with something that's already so personal and so like detailed. Like I have to ask you permission before I assume something about your character, because it's so well established and so specific already. Compared to somebody with dot points, I'm a chef rabbit that talks too much. Okay, right. So this is that we could go a lot of places with this. And like in the end, Finry always turns into something with a heart, with a soul, and with like, you know, a deep connection to the world. But it doesn't start off with all of that, you know, built into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I remember when I was creating my character for the Waterdeep campaign. It was the first proper campaign I was involved in. It was, yeah, that's it. First proper campaign I was involved in. And I think I, as a player, very much over-prepared my character. But from my naive point of view, I felt I had to do that to help me understand like the kind of character this person was going to be and how to play them. Not just rather than just giving you a bunch of, I try to give you a bunch of like plot hook opportunities if they were there for the taking, which you took me up on. But me writing probably overly verbose was me trying to get in the head of that character.
And I think that stuff is really cool, and I encourage players to do it for their own sake.
Yeah.
Like, if you can just write a diary entry from the point of view of your character after a cool, you know, big plot moment to kind of capture how your character felt about all that, you know, that's going to give you a lot of deep understanding of like how they differ maybe from your, you know, your perspective as a person, you know, how they would approach differently to you. I think there's a lot of value in analyzing that stuff. And I mean, to that point, I'll ask you a question. You do find yourself being able to dive deep into your characters and dive deep into your world and spend your time doing all of this research. How have you found, like, what tricks would you give to everybody who wants to also take their time to really absorb a world and make sure they understand those nuances before running? What would you advise they do from what you've learned preparing for your 2 campaigns?
There's 2 answers to this question. If it's pre-written or homebrew, right? So
let's start with the pre-written, because I think a lot of people start there with their campaigns.
I think pre-written, I absolutely recommend reading the content as much as you can, and you don't have to read it end to end before starting, but it's good to have a good handle on probably the first couple of sessions worth of content. Like I mentioned, we're 11 episodes in and I'm still trying to get through the Rama the Frost Maiden content. But I think reading through as much of that content as possible has helped me kind of get a better understanding of the world and the players, the characters at stake and the different factions and motivations of people and whatnot, and trying to get a really good feel for the vibe. Right? That's my recommendation for a pre-written content. Obviously, that's really easy with things like Candlekeep Mysteries or the Keys to the Golden Vault type stuff. Of course, it's like a couple of pages, you're done. And when we were running one of those episodes of Candlekeep, I had reread the same like 6 pages, must have been like 15-20 times trying to get through that content because it took us so long. But that's the thing, you're going to have time on your hands. These pre-written modules take a long time to get through. And also, actually, doubling, just something else on that.
Not double clicking though.
Not double clicking, no. For any of this pre-written content, you don't have to go and get everyone else's ideas like I have. Because that's what I thought I had to do. I was paranoid that I wasn't going to understand the world enough. But you very much have the writer's magic to come up with whatever you need to on the spot, right? I love that phrase you coined. Home brewing type stuff, I've been preparing for an entire campaign or even a single session. I think you've taught me this one, Robin, a while ago, is like you've got 3 primary kind of elements to any session or any type of campaign: the beginning, the middle, and the end. Right? I think if you have an idea of what's going to happen at the beginning to get things kicked off, the twist in the middle that could hit someone or occur, and the big finale that's going to potentially happen, then you're pretty well set, right? Having any of those three components ready to go, like in your brain as a homebrew creation or development world, whatever, then you've got a good understanding of what's going to happen. You can bring characters in, you can bring events in that are relevant. I'm going to add one more thing, which I think applies to both of these scenarios, is really understand your characters' backstories. Before we started Rama the Frost Maiden, I collected everyone's backstories and then I was interrogating them about them. So I understood exactly what these characters' history were. They were telling me they were coming from places in the Forgotten Realms that I had no idea existed. Right? I had to go find the map. How far is this from where we are now? How did this character get from here to here? How's it going to play into everything else? Because I think having that really good understanding of who each of these characters are lets you build those beginning, middle, and end relevant to those characters that are playing in it.
That's pretty cool. I think I'd love to. Like, one of these ideas I've always had is printing the minis out of all of the characters in a game. And I think it would be a cool exercise as a DM. Before you start, you interview each of your players about their characters. You ask them those tough questions, like, where do you come from? Like, what did you do? Really getting them to think about their in-character answers. And then, you finish it up by preparing their mini for them, or like getting that ready so you can see a visual representation of that character and really like immerse yourself in who they are before the campaign starts.
That's very cool. Like a game show type thing, interview.
Yeah, it's like, I think there's something to be said about these pre-game rituals. If you were like the things we do to help get our head in the game, like, I think running D&D is one of those things that you have to get into this really weird headspace where your only job is to like imagine epic landscapes and to describe like gruesome monsters with like danger in every word. It's like it's such a strange shift sometimes, but we all do it, and we do it pretty well to say, at least our players say so.
There's a couple of things unpacked there. One of the things you mentioned was interviewing characters or players in character. One of the things that I was interrogating people about, not interrogating, having them think about was, what's their family situation look like, right? What was their childhood like? I want to know the details of what made their character who they are. Because, and I got this kind of idea from, I think it's Xanathars. It's got all these roll tables for your life story, more or less.
Nice.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think that it adds a lot of depth to characters and gives characters stuff to care about. Like you mentioned before, you need that kind of hook. Why would I care? Well, now your sister's missing. Now you care, right? Or whatever the case might be. So that's something else I just wanted to just add in there that I think is really helpful in having like that first kind of session and helping characters start to connect. Because we've all had that situation before where you're like, session 1, let's go. And there's one character who's just completely left field and is very, very hard for the rest of the characters to connect with. And you're like, shit, how did I not see this coming?
It's like, oh no, that you have like opposing ideals. This is awkward.
Yeah. So I think if that happens, then at least you've got some way to try and bring them in, because you can connect common territory behind the scenes.
I think like the example that comes to mind of where I think we took a bit of time, but in the end it was almost it paid off narratively, was in Waterdeep, where we had everybody had just sort of had these battles and everybody was a bit on edge, but you'd come back from this big battle and just started having a drink together and just like, oh god, we've had enough trauma. Now it's just like, let's just bond, because at this point it's like there's nothing else left to do. And it was cool. It's like, okay, we've got enough shared history now as characters. We've got a natural reason to stick together. We've gotten over that awkward hump, and now we're a team. And it's like, how do you get to that point as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
Because that's when the fun starts,
Yeah. I feel like we're just sort of cresting that at the moment in Rama the Frost Maiden. We've just had that kind of, that incident that's kind of brought the party together. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen next with.
Well, that's so cool. I'm really glad.
Um, I was going to ask you another question because this is something which, as a newer DM, I've kind of struggled with a bit, but I'm not quite sure how to deal with it. Is dealing with silence, right? Which is a narrative type game we're playing here. As a DM, it's that kind of our roles to craft that experience. How often do you kind of lean on silence and give just almost force the players to step into that space and take action?
I think it's a hard one for me personally, just because I also find silence to be very difficult to deal with. I've at least historically,
which is why it's great to have you on the calls like this, Robert.
I have a natural tendency to fill space whenever it's necessary, and I could probably do it on a whim, you know. And I think when you're a DM, though, silence is definitely one of those tools where you sort of drop the mic and you let the players pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like, I have just ended what you thought was your future. What are you going to do about it? And it's like, I think those moments of challenge, those moments of like, here is the open possibility of your future, you know, take the reins.
Yeah.
Like I've given you every chance now to do what you want to do. And I think that's where that personality thing comes in, though. It's like, sometimes when you give that silence, you know who's most likely to pick up the challenge. You know, it's like the other person in the room who also has a tendency to just fill the empty air. And I guess for me, that sort of led me to try my best to craft instead stories or like moments of silence where it's like intentionally signaling someone out. It's like, I want you to feel this moment. I want you to know that this moment right here, this is for you. This thing that we're going through, like we're all experiencing something very deep to your character. The only person that gets to sort of tell us all, you know, how it feels and what we should feel next and how we should react is you. It's like, what do you do now? And I think that's sometimes the most powerful silences for me is when somebody's like big backstory moment is happening and the spotlight is on them and they've been handed that mic and they get to have their moment of glory, their moment of fulfillment of all of this work. That's my favorite silence, is that like pause before they like find the way to describe this milestone. That like, it feels so good to achieve that as a player in D&D. It's like, I did it, I got the big flaming sword, you know, I climbed the mountain, I defeated the big boss.
It is what it's all about.
and Jim Adams says very well, like sometimes silence is just that puzzles are difficult and that when you throw them at players, they end up just sitting there scratching their head for a while in silence.
That's true. That is true. Silence is a way of thinking.
You can't keep a silence forever as a DM either, right? Like at a certain point, especially in a streaming landscape, it's like, this is not great radio, guys.
Absolutely. I've actually been, you know, whilst running these sessions, I kind of think about it as it's happening, or just after something's happened. I'm like, I just leave too much silence. Like, one of the things I critique myself on is that things happen too slowly, or I leave too much just space for people to try and jump in rather than trying to just shift people from place to place. See, we're running a thing at the moment where it's almost real time. Like we have a clock running in game, right?
Damn.
So we're 12 sessions in and it's been 2 days, right? And I just don't know yet whether that's the right approach or how much I can just if we just fast forward 4 or 5 hours, now we're over here. And I think those silent moments of silence are those spaces where I think those just fast forward moments could happen, right? Because maybe I'm being overly critical of myself in saying that when those silences happen, it feels like people are thinking, what next, right? And I know the moment you're talking about when you're building up this to this moment of like, this is your moment, player, go, this is your thing, right?
Yeah.
But when it's not that, when it's just like, whether as a DM you're like, this point in the story, your character should say something. Sometimes they don't. Like, especially if you're trying to put a character in a spot or a player in the spotlight who isn't one of those people who often jumps in to fill the silence, who is also one of those more passive players. And I don't know how to deal with this situation where like the story has gravitated towards them. And it's like, what do I do with this?
And I wonder sometimes, because like I definitely have players who openly come to me and say, hey, like I love being here and I love participating and I love listening, but I don't want the spotlight. It's like I'd rather not have the focus on me. I'm happy with my backstory. I'm happy to have it mentioned and whatever, but I don't want to necessarily be the front man of anything. And I think that's sometimes also fair. And it's hard, but it's like one of those things that sometimes it's just a conversation of, let's just like, what sort of involvement do you want? And maybe then in those situations when it is a person that's like not picking up the bait, I'm thinking maybe in those situations I might try to instead play a bit of a movie instead of trying to have a conversation, and more like describe a scene from something that like the past, or like what's happening and like how their backstory characters are interacting, not necessarily making them drive, but just giving them a personal show for their character's history's sake. Interesting
way to play it. Yeah, play the reels.
We might have to give that a go.
Yeah, right. Well, look, we've been chatting for over an hour now, and that's probably about our cap for this evening. Unless anything else you want.
The two that I want to make sure we cover off
eventually,
if not tonight, is definitely the self-pressure, doubt, self-talk.
Right, I have skipped over that one. My bad.
It's not that it's your bad. I think it's just one that's super important. Yeah, it's like it's happening again. I think I appreciate that you ask me lots of questions in these things, and I saw someone in the chat say as well. But it's like don't sell yourself short with the amazing prep that you're doing and the obvious effort you're putting into establishing the world and becoming the lore keeper of the setting that you've stepped into. That is something that not every DM is doing, and it's not something that every player gets to experience. I left a lot on the table, and I think your players probably attest to this, but your worlds must feel so rich as a result. And so even though we all might have different approaches to DMing, the main thing we always have to remember, the only measure of success is, did our players have a good time?
That's it, right? That's the thing. I've only recently watched that episode of Matt Colville's thing, and that's it. It's like, if your player's having fun, then you can have fun. Like, that's the goal. That's sometimes hard to judge, I think. Apart from like going up and asking people, great, yes, but I think you potentially can get a biased view on that. No one's going to say no, unless you had a completely shit time of it. Right, which I think, as like personally, I'm getting more confident in this now. I know I was, and people have told me before, completely over preparing for sessions. Yeah, and now I've scaled that back and being a bit more free flowing, and things are a bit more adaptable. And I think I feel like everyone's starting to get more involved in the world, having more fun. But it's.
I mean, at least from the chat, I can see one person that tends to agree.
Good. Phew. But it's real, right? So I've taken to providing the players with opportunities so after every session, after every game we play, the following day, there's this little survey that goes out automatically, which is like, what was your highlight from the session? Just one thing. I don't want like 2 stars and a wish kind of material. It's just, what was your highlight? Like, what did you find most fun? Which is great, because it's good to see where people like sort of said that was a good moment.
How do you find the response sort of to those? Is it fairly regular?
Yeah. I mean, not everyone, because people have stuff to do. That's fine.
Of course. But do you feel like somebody will do it one week and then not another, and they'll do it another
Yeah.
one again a few
Yep.
weeks later?
Yep. And I'll make sure I get in there and respond as well. Like, what parts that I find most enjoyable about the session, or something which I can remember, which was a funny moment or a good piece of play or something.
Just for your own context, like historically, or how do you use that data?
I use that data to sort of gauge player engagement, fun levels, and also what kind of content and activities people find really enjoyable to feed into future sessions.
Have you been able to take that data and make changes to your approach as a result?
Subjectively, yes. Objectively, no, that's very hard for me to measure. But
Sure.
I think that, like, taking these inputs in, or some of the comments in, and just being a bit more flexible. I feel like previously the sessions were a bit too much on rails.
Right.
And now with more flexibility, I feel like some of that's opened up, and I think that was the result of some of this input.
I think a testament to, you and anybody that gets feedback, half of it is getting the feedback, the other half is actioning it, and it's always, I think you've nailed it, where the hardest part is just asking sometimes for some feedback. That's a very cool method. I don't know if everybody has access to that, but definitely just asking at least one person what they thought, and maybe passing that around every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But if you do want to set up the campaign, maybe drop a how-to article.
We use Slack for this, and it works amazing.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's not sponsored, but I do work there. The other thing I do, and this is again another thing on feedback, I've throughout my professional career been working very hard to figure out how I accept and work on feedback, or take on feedback. I now ask a monthly, I call it a player pulse, which is an anonymous survey, more detailed, like, what's your engagement level? How much fun are you having? What's your most key moment? Or I can't remember the types of questions, but trying to get that more detailed but anonymous feedback directly to me. No one else can see that.
That's really cool.
I'm still waiting for my players to respond to one of those, by the way.
Slack uptake is slow.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the feedback on this kind of thing is what makes it's like, I feel like it's a spiral.
Fuck you from the chat, so that's good.
Harsh, that's the feedback I wasn't looking for. I feel like getting feedback in running sessions is a spiral, right? The more you get, the more you can adapt it, the better it gets.
It's like a feedback loop, It's
Yeah.
like it continues to improve itself over time.
Absolutely. As long as DMs, you're willing to take that on board and adapt. If you've got a very kind of railroaded, this is my story, deal with it approach, that may not fly.
And that's your session zero, right? Like, what are we in for? What are we actually expecting to get out of this? And not that tonight is the night, but I do want to eventually have this full episode on probably, like, we've talked a bit about pre-written pros and cons with homebrew, and sort of the way we approach homebrew prep and pre-written prep. But would love to do an episode on like how to start with a homebrew world, and how you would run your first session in a homebrew world from scratch. And that might be a fun topic for another day as well.
That's going to be me interviewing the hell out of you.
I have a lot of anecdotes about that one, and I keep learning more as I go. But that one's going to be fun.
All right, cool. I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to learn more, because I feel like even starting in building a homebrew world and starting from scratch, there's so many elements of that to roll into a pre-written campaign, because there's so many areas. The Icewind Dale I'm running at the moment is a very big area, and a lot of it has nothing in it, right? There's lots of opportunity to put stuff in it. Some of these things are going to be like, you travel along a snowy tundra for 3 weeks.
Thank you very much for playing.
Exactly right.
I think you'll be pleased to know that we'll be looking at exactly the how to build a villain next session with the big bad is the rough working title. So that'll be fun to chat through and see what each of us do to build some terror into our worlds and some enemies to overcome.
This is going to be an interesting one to talk about next time, especially in the context of homebrew versus pre-written, and how to make even a pre-written villain adapted or flexible.
And sometimes more tonally sort of fitting in your world that you found yourself in.
Yeah, because this is exactly what I'm working through right now. I'm excited to have a chat about that one next time we hit up Dungeon Mastery. But for now, we'll leave it there. Don't forget to check out Behold Games, our fantastic sponsor for all your gaming gear. Link going in the chat, or you can find them at beholdgames.com.au and use code RagingRolls at checkout for a bit of a discount. We have a fantastic giveaway we're running next week from Behold Games, a fantastic set of dice, which I will share on our Discord in the next couple of days. So do stick around and join us in the Discord if you're not there already.
And it looks like we also just quickly have probably one of our first guests looking like somebody wants to present their post-apocalyptic, futuristic, dystopian world.
Oh, guest opportunity for homebrew design.
Yeah, that could be a fun episode, just walking through somebody's homebrew world.
We'll track down that person, have a chat about getting guesting on. But for now, thanks for sticking around. I am DM Jez.
And DM of Doom Robin.
And we'll see you guys for Ramen the Frost Maiden, episode 12, I think, next week. And then the week after that, which is, I think, at the 2nd of November, what's in store, Robin?
So the DM of Doom is putting on his DM hat again for a special post-Halloween episode, looking into what kind of horror our team can uncover in a single night of play. So look forward to finding out more about that.
It's going to be awesome. All right. Thanks for hanging around, everyone. We'll chat again soon. Bye.
See you guys. Bye.